Thank you, Rich, for grounding us in this place. Our next speaker is Sherri Mitchell. She was born and raised in the Penobscot Indian Reservation in Maine. She is a lawyer, a community activist, a poet, a scholar, and a philosopher. Her Northfield Historical Commission is very proud to sponsor Dr. Mitchell speaking on her book, Sacred Instructions. Please put your questions in the Q&A for her to answer after her talk. Thank you for being here.
Kachiwaliwan, thank you, Liz. And Rich, Kachiwaliwan, Nita, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak to those in your homeland. Kwe, Gwenude, hello and welcome. Andaliwisi, Wanahamugwasit, Najio, Banawapskewi. Basilda Donabama Kawasus, Nilbanawapskewi, Naga Kakagus Niltibayik. I am from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Tibayik. And I want to just say, Kolazikal Nidaps, Ledagwesanuk, hello to my relatives in the West. Nil Wabanaki from Wabanaki territory. Nalita Haziu and Diane, I'm very happy to be here with you today. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to share some time with you, to talk with you about the things that are in my book, Sacred Instructions, and also to some of the things that are in the follow-up to Sacred Instructions, which will be coming out this year. And we're still determining what the name will be, because the name of the book, every book that I've been a part of and everything that I've written and put out in public, I present it to my clan mothers and I asked them, what do you think about this? And we sat for a whole 8-hour day to figure out what we wanted to call Sacred Instructions, which seems like such a simple title, but they wanted everything to be just right. They talked about how it sounded, what it felt like when they said it out loud. And every chapter in the book, I called one of them and read it to them to see if it was okay, what I was sharing was okay with them. And so it's going to be the same for this one. So it's tentatively going to be titled Sacred Laws with some subtitle, but whatever they decide is what it's going to end up being called. So we'll let you know. It's such an interesting time that we're living in, that there's so many things that we could talk about. There's so many challenges that we're facing right now, and there's such incredible grief in the air during this time. I was just talking with someone this morning about the fact that here in the United States, there have been 500,000 plus deaths from COVID, and that there's no way for us to be able to dismiss that truth and maintain our humanity at the same time. That we can't dismiss the harms that others are experiencing, that type of massive loss of life, the devastating impacts to families, without acknowledging that doing so is going to cost us a piece of our humanity. And so it's important for us to let ourselves grieve this time, because people have lost so much. And I just want to acknowledge that we are living in this time. I want to acknowledge that there is this immense grief. I want to speak truth to the moment that we are experiencing together before we go into any other discussion, because I think it's important for people to know that what you're experiencing, what you're feeling is being felt by everyone, that others are suffering through this time as well. And so this illusion that we have of being separated from one another is something that I wrote about in Sacred Instructions. And so in my mind, that is the key moment of demarcation for the human species. That is the, if such a thing exists, that is the original sin. And so when human beings started to see themselves as other, the moment that they took themselves out of the garden by believing that they were somehow separate from the rest of the beings that lived within the natural world, is the moment when we began to go off track as a species. And so we have a number of stories about that time. And our story of the first illness is a story that really resonates for the moment that we're living in. And I'll give you, as my friend Kevin Deere says, the Reader's Digest version of this story. In this story, the animals have called council. And now in all of our creation stories, the animals in some way make it possible for human beings to enter into this sphere of existence. They prepare the ground for us. They teach us how to live and interact with the rest of the beings in the natural world. They look out for us when we do foolish things because, our reference as children of the earth is a reference to the youth of our species, that we are the youngest species here. And so we're the children, we're the youngest. And so the animals and the trees and the plants are our elders. And so they have provided the way for us to be here in all of our creation stories. We have many different creation stories that talk about different aspects of our being and teach us about the multi-layered nature of our connection to the rest of life. But in the story of the first illness, the animals have called council because the children of the earth have begun to lose their way. They have fallen away from the natural world. They have walked away from their elders, the animals, the trees, the plants. They've forgotten about their connection to the waters and to the winds. And in doing so, they have begun to behave in ways that are causing harm to other living beings. And so the animals are really thinking hard about this and praying about it and trying to decide what to do. And it's very emotional for the animals because they love us. They've helped raise us up as the children that we are, right? And then we've gone astray. And so there's great sadness that they have to make a decision on what are they going to do with the humans to help them to realize the importance of their connection to the rest of life. And so the animals decide that they are going to give the humans illness so that they can learn about their connection to the rest of life. And they're going to give them illness that's not going to be healed by man-made medicine. They're going to give them illness that can only be healed by them reconnecting to their relatives in the natural world. And so the animals make the decision and they give the human beings illness. And the human beings begin to get sick. Many of them die. There's a lot of fear and a lot of grieving in the human communities. And after watching this suffering unfold for a period of time, the trees and the plants called council, and they went into council together. And they expressed that they had pity for the children of the human species who were suffering so badly. And they discussed how were they going to be able to help these children without taking away the lesson that the animals had given to them. And so what the trees and the plants decided was that if the human beings could humble themselves and come back to them and relearn the language of the plants and the trees and renew their relationship with them, that they would then speak back to them and they would give them the medicines that they needed to heal their people. And so the human beings had forgotten the language of the animals. They'd forgotten the language of the trees. They'd forgotten the language of the plants. They'd forgotten how to hear the voice within the wind and to see the wisdom of their ancestors reflected back to them from the waters. And so the trees and the plants decided that they were going to send this message out to the human beings on a dream. And so they sent this message out to them on a dream and waited to see if any of them would catch it. And there was a grandmother in one of the communities who remembered the times when she was a young girl, when the elders in her community had talked about talking with and hearing the voices and the wisdom of the plants and the trees, of being able to communicate with the animals. This is how long it had been since the humans had walked away at this point in time. And she caught that dream that was sent out by the plants and the trees. She woke up the next morning and she told her family, I'm going into the forest to speak with the plants and the trees, and they all thought she was crazy. And she told them, I had a dream, and I remember the elders used to tell us that the plants and the trees could heal us, and that they carried the medicine that could make us well. And so she went off into the forest and she began to make offerings and to say prayers and to have conversations with the plants and the trees. And they watched her for a long period of time. And then after a period of time, they decided that she was sincere, and that she was demonstrating the sufficient amount of humbleness in her approach to them. And so they began to speak with her. And as they began to speak with her, she began to remember more and more of the truth of her being. She began to remember more and more her connection to the natural world. Her ancestral memory began to open up. And she remembered that it was the animals and the plants and the trees who would welcome them and to help them to be able to live here. And so the plants and the trees gave this woman the medicine that was needed in order to heal her people. She went back and she prepared the medicine and she dosed it to her people the way that the plants and the trees had told her. And when everyone began to get well, they had counsel in that community. And they shared the information that they had with other human beings, other communities. And that particular community, the one where that grandmother came from, made the decision that they were going to return to live in relationship with the forest. They were going to return to the edges where they had once lived in order to renew their relationships with the rest of the beings in the natural world. And so that story is a very old story that has been passed down from grandmother to grandmother to grandmother to grandmother, grandmother to granddaughter, excuse me, for generations. And having heard that story growing up, and then living in this time where we are living in a time where we have been given illness that came from the animals, that is resistant to most man-made medicines, that is most responsive to herbal medicines and homeopathic medicines that come from the plants and the trees. It helps me to realize that one of the things that one of our elders always used to say in ceremony, there was a woman named Teresa Sapier, and one of my good friends always talks about her as well. And every time she was going to tell us one of the stories, she used to say, this isn't a story, this really happened. And so as I'm telling you this story, this isn't a story, this really happened, and it's happening again right now. And so we have once again wandered too far away from our connection to the rest of life. We have wandered too far away from our understanding of our place within creation. That we are children who are behaving as though we are the ones who are most wise, and we are the ones within creation who oftentimes know the least. We are behaving as though we have dominion over the natural world, when the natural world could eliminate life on this planet in a moment. And so we've forgotten our place. We've forgotten about the balance that's required for us to live with the rest of creation. And I also think that as we're thinking about this story and we're thinking about this time that we're in, and we have this moment of pause, this incredibly challenging moment of pause where people have been suffering in all kinds of ways, with illness certainly, but also suffering with having to be alone with themselves, suffering with an inability to be distracted from the ways that they are separated from their own truth. But we've also been given this incredible opportunity where if we take the time, if we just take the time right now, we just take a couple of breaths together, and we just put our hands here, and we really focus ourselves on connecting heart to heart. It doesn't take long before we actually start feeling that energetic flow between us, even though I'm looking at you on a screen and you're looking at me on a screen. Even though there may be thousands of miles that separate us, physically, the distance between us is part of the illusion of separation that we've been living under. And this time is offering us an opportunity to look at that illusion of separation in so many different layered ways, to be able to eliminate all of the barriers that we have put up before us. One of the things that I've been writing about for the follow-up to Sacred Instructions, which I'm very excited, I was excited about Sacred Instructions. I am very, very excited about the follow-up because I've been able to go much, much deeper. And one of the things that I've been talking about is about the borders that we come to. And so, we are constantly coming up against borders. We've just been through this time period here in the United States where there's been all of this discussion and all of this pain that's come up around borders and crossing borders. And every single day we cross borders. We cross borders in our physical lives, in our emotional lives, in our mental lives, in our spiritual lives, and contemplating the borders that we cross easily, those that I can't say we see them, but we experience them as being invisible, that they're so insignificant to us that we just cross them without any complication. There are the borders that we cross that then make us invisible. Maybe we become invisible to certain people in our lives. Maybe by association with a certain group, we've been cast out of another, right? There are borders that make us invisible. There are borders that are part of some heroic journey that we cross, that when we overcome the obstacle, climb the wall and get on the other side, we've achieved something great. But then there are also the borders that are sacrosanct, the ones that we approach and we feel like we cannot cross for whatever reason. And many of the borders that we feel like we can't cross, like spanning this physical distance that's between us, is because we have been led to believe that it's an impossibility. We've been led to believe that the ways that we should be connecting one another are against nature. How long were there laws on the books that prevented marriage between races? And so we had people telling us that was against nature. Those same people would tell you that it's not okay for you to be sitting here today on a Saturday morning listening to Skajinui Apid Nilbanawabskewi, right? An Indigenous woman who is talking to you and sharing with you, because what I have to say is not valuable by the society that made those rules. And so those are borders, those are sacrosanct borders that were upheld for a long time because the society told us that it was not okay to cross them. And so now we're sitting here together and we're facing all of these new borders. And we're trying to decide which threshold we're standing on. And the one that is most intriguing to me in this moment, because there are many, and I've been writing about them for weeks now, but the one that's most intriguing to me in this moment is this threshold that we're standing on between having and realizing the potential of our humanity. That if we do not choose to step over this threshold and begin to return to a state of compassionate awareness, a sense of moral obligation for one another and for the earth, then we're not going to have the opportunity to continue to exist into the future. And so when I contemplate where we are collectively standing on that threshold between having and realizing our potential, the potential of our humanity, I wonder how many others are anticipating that leap. How many others are willing to lift their foot and cross that threshold? How many others are willing to join hands with the people standing beside them and carry as many across with them as they can? And I wonder if it will be enough for us to survive. Because as we're contemplating this shift back toward compassionate awareness, back toward our humanity, coming back into relationship with our relatives in the natural world. As we're thinking about that, and we're facing this time of illness, which is just the beginning. This is only the first. There are more to come, because the amount of harm that has been caused to the earth has been so severe at this point in time. So as we're sitting here in this moment, it's a moment of reflective healing. We are also sitting in this moment of reflective healing where we begin to realize that we can't heal our bodies without healing the earth, and that the earth cannot heal until we are healed. There's this symbiosis that exists within this reciprocal healing that is occurring between us and the earth. We begin to recognize that the choking of the lungs of the earth by the burning down of the Amazon, the destruction of the boreal forest, is a reflection of the respiratory illness that we are facing within our own bodies under COVID. We start to recognize that the clotting of the blood that is connected to this illness is symbolic of the ways that we have dammed up the flow of the waters, the sacred waters of life. All of the toxicity that we have imposed onto Mother Earth is now being reflected in the types of illness that we are seeing within our own bodies. And I see all of these beautiful people who are standing in protection of life. They're standing in protection of life. They're standing for the water. They're standing to protect the forests. They're standing to protect the animals. And as they're standing there, they're putting into their body foods that are coming out of packaged plastic containers. They're drinking Red Bull. They're poisoning their body. They're standing for the protection and the healing of Mother Earth while they're contaminating the body that has been given to them to live upon this earth. And until we start to realize that our bodies are a reflection of the Earth Mother, and that the Earth Mother is a reflection of us, neither one of us is going to be able to fully heal. And I think that reflective healing aspect between us and the earth is really critically important for us to realize, because we can't be healing the flesh of the earth. We can't be healing the sacred waters of the earth, the blood. We can't be healing the soils of the earth, that which nurtures and sustains us on a nutrient level, without being able to do what it is that we need to do to heal our own bodies. And I have been on that healing journey over the past year myself. I have celiac disease, a genetic form of celiac disease. My aunt had it, and then I have a younger person in my family who has it. There's someone in every generation of our family who has the genetic form of celiac disease. And I have not been able to absorb nutrients, and have had some microbleeds within my digestive tract, and am really severely anemic and don't have within my body the building blocks to have my blood be as strong and vibrant as it needs to be. So I have to get infusions on a regular basis to help fortify my blood. And I've thought about, how is the inability to accept nourishment into my body reflective of our stripping the nutrients away from the earth? How is the challenges that I've been having with my blood reflective of the sacred waters of life that look like arteries that flow through Mother Earth? And really aligning my healing journey with the healing journey of Mother Earth, and recognizing that there is a profound connection that's not theoretical, that is actually tangible. There's a physical connection to the well-being of my body and the well-being of Mother Earth. And so as we move through this process of recognizing our separateness, beginning to consider the borders that we need to cross in order to return to a state of wholeness, and to then immerse ourselves and engage in this reflective healing. I think that it's an opportunity for us to have accelerated growth at this time. And so in Sacred Instructions, I talked about what it means to live in a time of prophecy. And there's a section here that I just want to read from the end of the book. And I think this is important because there are a number of teachings from almost every faith tradition where people are saying that there's a prophecy that corresponds to the time that we're living in. And so there are so many people across the world that believe that we are living in a time of prophecy at a critical crossroads that we had been warned about. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean? What does that mean, right? And so I talk about that in this chapter. And at the end of this chapter, it says, at all times, we must remember that we are the dream of the ancestors come to life, the living expression of their seventh generation. We are not placeholders in time, but guardians of the future. As such, we have the responsibility for dreaming the next 7 generations into being. This dreaming is the work of our lives. It is what we were born to do. In order to complete this task, we must join our hearts and minds in a unified prayer. Then we must breathe life into a collective vision of peace, harmony, and balance, breathing into our hopes and dreams until that vision begins to take form and our future generations are able to walk into it as flesh and blood. So right now, if we're living in this time of prophecy, it's not a passive experience. It is an active experience. And so when I think about that in relation to those who are standing on the front lines, protecting the water, standing on the front lines, protecting the trees, standing on the front lines, protecting other living beings, what I recognize is also this chorus of voices around the globe who say that Indigenous rights are aspirational, that there's something that we can aspire toward. And the time for that aspiration has ended. It is now time for us to look at Indigenous rights, look at the stands that Indigenous peoples are taking, and begin to move those into active engagement. Start honoring today the rights of all living beings. Because if we can't begin to acknowledge and to honor the place that all living beings have within creation, then we don't have any opportunity to ensure the continuation of our species into the future. My friend Chris was one of the authors of the report that came out through the UN on the 1 million species who are in danger of extinction. And we're on a board together for an Indigenous land guardianship organization. And when we were talking about it after, this man who's a biologist, a wildlife biologist, got tears in his eyes. And he said, and they wouldn't allow us to talk about the human species being on that list. And so if we want to find our rightful place within creation, if we want to ensure a place for us within life, within this larger scheme of life, then we need to start humbling ourselves and remember that we are the children of the earth. We are the youngest species, and that our elders, the plants, the trees, the animals, the earth herself, the winds, the waters, they all have something to teach us. And if we can humble ourselves and begin to listen and begin to learn the language of the natural world again, it will provide us with all the information that we need in order to move ourselves forward in a good way. And so I want to say, Kachi Wiliwan and Basilda and Nabamuk, I offer these words for all my relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very important things for us to hear right now. So people are welcome to type their questions into the Q&A. Our first question says, your words are beautiful. What you are saying today reminds me of Winona LaDuke's calling the current main human life as the Windigo economy. Would you please speak to that?
Yeah, we have a story here about Giwok, the cannibal giant. And Giwok, the cannibal giant, is the one who is similar to the Windigo figure in Anishinaabe and also other traditional mythology. And it's the same as the, what they call the gods of chaos and destruction amongst the Kogi. And so nearly all Indigenous peoples have stories about this figure. And I wrote about Giwok in Sacred Instructions. And Giwok sleeps deep in the forest, and he only awakens to a very specific cry of the Earth Mother. And our stories tell us that this is our 4th time here. This is the 4th time that we have, our lives have been seeded here on Mother Earth. And that every other time we have chosen a path that has led us off the planet, caused us to exit the planet through some type of extinction event that we were a part of. And so in the story, Giwok has been placed deep in the forest to rise up when he hears a cry from the Earth Mother that human beings are creating or consuming faster than she can create, and they're harming her faster than she can heal. And so when Giwok wakes up, what he does is he dances the people into a false sense of security. He distracts them with all of this activity and gets them into his thrall, and then dances them faster and faster and faster until he dances them off the earth. They consume themselves into extinction. And then the Earth Mother is able to heal herself. And so we have been told that we are now in the dance of the cannibal giant. And the only way for us to put the cannibal giant back to sleep is for us to wake up. And again, I'm going to go back to what that elder said, because this is not a story. It's really happening, right? It's really happening. And so scientists just came out and said that the Earth is moving faster than it was in the past, and they're not quite sure why. And I had probably 150 emails after that report came out of people sending it to me and saying, the cannibal giant, right? That Earth is turning faster and faster and faster as we're getting closer and closer to the point of no return, where we are moving away from the ability to be able to maintain our life on the earth because of our choices. The ways that we're behaving right now, they're suicidal. And we look at the problems as being beyond our control to be able to solve because we've forgotten the power that we have collectively to co-create the reality that we're living in. There's this woman that I spoke at an environmental conference with one time, and she asked the group, why are we collectively building a world that none of us individually want to live in? That is the question of our time. Why are we collectively creating a world, co-creating a world that none of us would want to live in individually? And the flip side of that is the assumption that we collectively have the capacity to build a very different world. And I believe that we do have that capacity. I believe that we do have the vision, right? And the desire to survive into the future. And so I'm hopeful that that will end up being what we choose to do, because we have choice. We have choice in all of this.
Our next question is from a fellow panelist. She asks, where do you turn for help as these strange months go by?
So during COVID, I am fortunately blessed with a very large family. Some people would question whether or not that was a blessing. But I have family and extended family. And so I have elders in my life who I am incredibly thankful for. And I have I have this incredible way of life that's been gifted to me that helps me to stay in connection. And I had been traveling a great deal prior to COVID. In fact, the week that before the lockdown, I had just returned from doing a series of 6 small trips that were all combined, and was looking forward very much to taking a trip to the British Isles. I was going to go to Wales and to Scotland and Ireland for 6 weeks, and was foiled by COVID. So I decided that I was going to begin to mobilize something that I've been working on for the last 20 years. And so I bought a 200-acre farm, and I'm building an intentional community here, and a learning center for land-based teachings so that others can learn how to live in relationship with Reconnecting and all of our other relatives in the natural world. And so for me, being able to put my feet on the earth every day is help. For me, being able to have the opportunity to speak with, and the proper instruction as I was being raised to listen to the voices of my elders, and to know that those elders don't just exist in the human world. To listen to the voices of the trees, to listen for the voices of the birds. I had an incredible experience with some starlings when this all started that was profound, and that I learned some really profound lessons for. And do I have time to share that story, Liz?
Yes.
So I had this experience at the beginning of COVID, right after the shutdown, and we're in the process of building a house for my daughter. Everybody was chipping in time and energy, and I was there at her place, which was in the woods, And, you know, very quietly, she wasn't there. My son-in-law wasn't there. My granddaughter wasn't there. You know, it wasn't habitable at that point. I was there with two friends who had volunteered to come and help sheetrock and do some finish work that day. And I had been praying for the last 2 weeks because that's when this was right when we started with the shutdown, asking the beings in the winged nations, WINGED, winged nations, asking our relatives in the winged nations, what is it that you're trying to teach us right now? What is it that you most want us to know? And so I was in her house, and, you know, there was no power there. It's cold. And all of a sudden we heard this vibration, and I immediately got up and I started to go outside. And the other people the other two people, they were all working in different rooms, each of them. And they're like, what is that? And I said, it's birds, you know. And then as soon as I said it, she has these two big picture windows in the front of her house. And you could see the bodies of the birds, shadows going by like across the windows. And I grabbed some medicines that we call medicines for our prayers, and I ran outside. And I was standing out there, and thousands and thousands of starlings came by. And I thought, wow, I'm going to see a murmuration. And so I was just standing there and I was watching them, and they circled her house in the 200-foot perimeter, and they landed, because her house is in this tiny little clearing with all of these in this area that's just all trees, just the driveway and the little clearing where the house is, and everything else is deeply wooded. And they landed all the way around, lowest branch to tallest branch. Every tree had a starling in it. And there were probably about 10,000 of them when I asked the other two. The dog has strong opinions about them as well. And so we sat there, and the vibration of the sound from those birds was so loud that it was literally rattling the windows in my daughter's house. And I just got down on the earth, and I put my hand on the ground, and I just asked, you know, help me to see beyond, to hear beyond the limitations of my human being, to hear what it is that they're trying to communicate here. And I put some tobacco down as I was saying this prayer, and the top noise from their calling disappeared, and underneath it was just this hum, this like huge, it sounded like a freight train coming through a tunnel. And it just came, and it just shook through all three of us, like shook through our bodies, like our bones were shaking like the windows in my daughter's house. And it went through, and when I felt it like move through and go through to the other side of me, I thanked them. I thanked them for their message, and the sound stopped immediately, and they just lifted off the trees and they left. And now, if you've read my book, you know I've seen some things, right? I have had some experiences in my life. That was probably one of the most profound experiences that I've ever had. And what I learned from that over time, what ended up integrating for me is that what starlings do is they respond to a crisis. One of my friends, Revere Sun, uses this in her nonviolence teachings to talk about how starlings kind of dance away danger. And so I had to make sure I let her know and thanked her for placing that thought in my mind so that I could help me to process what it was that I was being told on that day, and that what we're facing, you know, the perceived enemy, like a hawk will come in to try to take one of the starlings or to take their eggs, or some other bird of prey will come in and pose a threat to the starling community. And there are enough of them where they could attack and they could kill that predator. But what they do instead is they dance it away. They dance it away and move it outside and send it on its way. And so that's the first lesson. We need to stop seeing things as an enemy that we have to conquer, because we do that even with our activism for peace. We look at it as an act of conquest. And those continuing and cycling acts of conquest, so what I call conquest activism, those continuing acts of conquest continue us in this cycle of death and dying. And so, we need to move outside of that. The second lesson that's in this is that we have the perceived enemy is the climate crisis, right? The perceived enemy is COVID. And we're seeing them as distinct beings, but they're really one and the same, right? They're the same problem. Climate change and COVID are the same problem. And so what we need to do is we need to act like the starlings do as one biological entity. We need to move together as one biological entity where there's no leader that's out front that can get picked off, that the murmuration of the starlings shifts direction and changes in a moment's notice. And we're like, how do they do that? They're going here, and then all of a sudden they're all going here, right? If you've ever seen a murmuration, it's just quite beautiful to watch. And there doesn't seem to be, a trigger for the shifting. And that's because all along the outskirts and within the murmuration, there is a fluidity so that anybody can become the leader. It's not a movement of leadership where there's one leader, but it's a leaderful movement. We need a leaderful movement where everybody rises up together and we begin to act as one biological entity to address the challenges that we have caused in relation to our own survival on the planet. But we also need to rise up as one biological entity, and we need to address this threshold moment that we find ourselves in, where we have to really make the choice collectively to realize our humanity and to bring that to the forefront, to be walking forward heart first in our attempts to solve these problems. Because if we don't do that, if we fail to do that, then we're just continuing to perpetuate these cycles of conquest and death over and over again until there's nothing left to be consumed. And so that was a really beautiful expression for me to think about. How do we handle the crisis that we're in? We handle the crisis that we're in by, getting back into flow with the harmony of life and dancing the threat outside, rather than, looking at it as something that we have to conquer and kill. We have to bring ourselves back into harmony and start moving again in relationship with the rest of the natural world.
So we have about 5 minutes left and two very different questions. I'll just let you choose which one.
Oh, no.
One is, would you comment on the efforts to change the laws to recognize the rights of more than human beings? And the second one is, how do we talk to trees?
Well, for the second one, ask the trees. Go to them every day, make some type of offering. Demonstrate to them your willingness to be in right relationship with them, and then see what they have to tell you. And for the first one, we have a law at the Penobscot Nation that is in our books, where the river, the Penobscot, the Penobscot River, is the first citizen on our tribal census. And so this is something that I work on a continuous basis. So, this past year, I've contributed to 3 different books on climate change. I am part of an organization called Neotero, that is an Indigenous land guardianship program that deals directly with climate change mitigation, adaptation, and the protection of Indigenous land and water rights. I've also, worked through the Land Peace Foundation, which is my organization, and have trained Conservation International, the National Wildlife Federation, and a number of other big NGOs that are working on the front lines of climate change, looking at mitigation, adaptation, but also working toward providing rights for the beings in the natural world. And so if we truly want to do the work of putting ourselves in the right frame of mind going forward, then we have to recognize that all beings within the natural world, every ecosystem, every waterway has a right to exist unmolested by human expectation. And so we have placed this false sense of value upon the land based on, Descartes and Lockean theories, where the land has no value in and of itself. We only see it as a means to profit. And so if the land is not being put to some, as John Locke said, some beneficial use, and that beneficial use is only defined as being something that's profitable, that is a profit-driven activity, then that use is considered to have no value. And so, part of this process goes hand in hand with changing our social value structures. And so right now, all of our societal value is based on capitalism. It's based on an exchange economy. Water just began being traded on the commodities market. That should terrify everyone, and everyone should be standing up and saying, hell no to that, right? Everyone. Because then those who have those commodities get to decide who lives and who dies, because none of us can survive without water. Right? So as we're contemplating giving rights to nature, we also have to think about the ways that we assign value. And if the ways that we assign value are all attached to capitalism and to an exchange economy, then we're not going to be able to really adequately address the situation that we're facing, because the first commodity on the exchange market were the bodies of women that were being exchanged for land rights and protection by their fathers under the feudal system. And so when we think about human bodies being the first commodity on the exchange market, and then all of the capitalist ventures that have come forward in the last 5,000 years, because that was 3000 BCE when that happened. And we think about the last 5,000 years of capitalism and commodification, every aspect of our being has been commodified. We have taught to make ourselves into a saleable commodity. And so the example that I always use when I'm teaching classes on this is that we even use this language when we're discussing our most intimate relationships. So when a friend is single, they say that they're on the market. They're available to be sold. And so we have to start thinking about that in the ways that we show up in the world as a saleable commodity rather than as ourselves. And so if, the most radical thing that you can do is to strip off the commodification of your being and to emerge in the fullness of your being with all parts of you whole and intact, and bringing forward what I talk about in the first chapter of Sacred Instructions, your creation song, so that you can add your voice to harmonizing this great symphony of life. It's the most radical act of change that you can make. And so I encourage you all to remove yourself as commodities from the exchange market and to stand up with a radical sense of self-awareness and use the gifts that you came in with, even if they're not marketable, to change the world. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, for inviting me to be with you today. And I hope that the rest of your day is equally beautiful. I'm gonna keep you on and listen as long as I can. So thank you.
You